Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Evolution of CDPs with Scott Brinker and Mike Anderson. Now, normally I would introduce my panelists, but this time I feel I don't need to introduce my panelists. But just for anybody who might not know, Scott, do you want to give a quick intro on yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. Excited to chat about this topic with you. Yeah, I wear a couple hats in the industry. I've been the editor of the Chiefmartec blog for, oh goodness, like 16 years here. So that crazy MarTech landscape, if ever you've seen that, yes, sadly, that is something I have inflicted upon the world. So my apologies to you. And then I also am the VP of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot, where I help HubSpot integrate with all the wonderful companies on that map.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Anderson, founder and CTO of Tealium. I actually want to say, Scott, thank you for that slide, because when we were pioneering CDPs and we were talking about data syndication, this was the slide that we used to show directionally where it was going. And I actually remember several times showing a slide that had all of the build outs year over year of this, so we could show, look, this is how much more complicated things are getting. You really need to get a handle on your data at this point. And so thank you, because where I am today kind of got helped along a bit by some of your vision.
Well, I am so happy to hear that it was helpful. And yes, if there's one thing we can conclude from that like multi-year expansion of the MarTech landscape is, boy, anyone who can help marketers like organize the data flowing through that ecosystem, you've got a valuable proposition to the world.
Definitely pain.
You know, as my listeners can tell, I don't think I need to be here today. However, my name is Sav Ketan. I'm Director of Product Marketing and Strategy at Tealium. And my job today is to ask maybe 3 questions and then let them share their opinion. You know, what got us here today is we were having a discussion about just how many things have changed over the last, 10 years in this CDP space, but also how many problems have stayed the same. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is what does data strategy look like and what has evolved over the last decade. But Scott, I wanted to start with you. Do you happen to remember the time when you included CDPs in your super graphic? What was the world back then? What can you share with us from back then?
Yeah, it was, and thank you for that callback, the nostalgic callback. It was 2014, so it's literally 10 years ago. We had taken a year off in 2013 because, like, in 2011 there was like 150 products. In 2012 there was 350. We took a year off, and of course everyone was anticipating, well, boy, 350, that's way too many MarTech products. You know, in a couple years surely this will have consolidated. And I came back and it was just under 1,000 products. In fact, when you were encouraging me to think about this for today's event, I went back and I found the post I wrote at the time saying, like, well, what if 1,000+ marketing technology vendors was the new normal? And I remember at the time people were like, no, this is crazy. And they're right. It's not the new normal. The new normal is like 10,000+ MarTech vendors. But, you know, this is all related to like why the customer data platform layer, you know, really started to rise at that same moment, is because if there's been 2 consistent themes, you know, we hear, you know, about MarTech is, wow, on one hand, it's amazing, astounding to see all these different, you know, products and technologies and innovations. And if there's some sort of emerging tactic happening somewhere in the marketing universe, someone is building a MarTech product to unlock it. And like the only way this actually works for marketers is if they can get these things connected together. And there's many different ways you can do that, but at the foundation, if you can't get your data flowing across these systems, really there's no point. It's like the tree that falls in the forest if nobody's around to hear it. You know, if you've got something that's like, you know, generating data, but you're not actually feeding it into your larger, you know, marketing operations, did the data really exist at all?
Mike, it feels like he gave perfect setup for what was going on with Tealium at that time.
I mean, we saw it. We came out of the we built Tealium initially out of the Omniture website story acquisition, which then went on to become Adobe Analytics. And we worked for Website Story, me and Ali Ben and the other co-founder, and we saw this. We saw this kind of just perpetual vendor specificity in all of the implementation techniques, where it's I'm not implementing these tools in a language that speaks to my business. I'm implementing these tools in a language that speaks to somebody else's business. And at that point, trying to get a handle on this data and trying to understand that it's all going directionally into this customer experience. The digital transformation was maybe being kicked around a little bit as a term, but nobody really knew that meant concierge level experiences like they used to have in the 50s with the corner store at massive scale using digital solutions to get there. And so that was where we started. But I can tell you something that hasn't changed over the years is the needs from marketing and all of the tools that have been out there. There's just so much opportunity out there to try to help marketers do a better job. And the answer is just not always go to the engineering team. It's how do you make marketing more self-sufficient for what they want to do? And so those were some of the premises that we started with. But customer experience is. We looked at it and said, things are going to get a lot better for us over the next 10 years. I think the iPhone had just come out at that point too, like 2007. And customer experience is going to be where every company needs to focus. And then there's going to be so much opportunity and so much efficiency for all of us as consumers over the next 2 decades, because it's all just going to get easier and easier and easier, hopefully. But as a result, it's created hundreds of new economies.
Yeah, I mean, so many cool concepts. So I wanted to just say, like you said, Scott, at the beginning, I think your scape, your super graphic for this year is over 11,000 apps. And your first one was 150 apps. And that growth rate is insane for this industry. And then, Mike, to your point, the data layer was intended to be a language that we can speak to our own data, but then also that it can speak to all the other tools in our stack, And that, just for the listeners, that was one of our core ethos of Tealium, is that we don't tell you what your data should be organized as. We are completely schemaless. You organize your data however you want. And for the longest time, that was a roadblock because people felt, you're giving me a blank canvas. I don't know how to think about it. And now the world is shifting and they want that blank canvas because they don't know what they're going to have to do with their data. So it's, everything seems to be going in a circle. Okay, so moving the time along, we went from the beginning where, like you said, Scott, it was close to 1,000 apps. The middle layer had just shown up. You're starting to talk about the value of the data layer. And now we get hit with data privacy. Then we get hit with COVID. We get hit with third-party data. And first-party data starts to become a topic that everybody now cares about. I would love to hear if you remember that sort of chapter in the martech world and where everybody was going that time.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. I think we're still in the early days of people really comprehending all the opportunity that exists around first-party data. But if I would go back to pre-COVID, I think one of the things that, with this expansion of the industry, going from a few hundred to a few thousand to, now over 10,000, apps, it's been fascinating that year over year, people generally predict like, oh, no, this is just going to consolidate. It's going to go, it's going to go down to like 5 vendors. All right, that's probably never going to happen, but it's usually because we look at these historic economic environments, the historic business models in software, and we say, oh, well, 20 years ago, this is how software used to work and the market dynamics around it. unfortunately or fortunately, or the world has changed. We've got like a very different dynamic in the cloud. The barriers to entry for creating software have just, for all practical purposes, are zero. Now this doesn't mean that everyone can go out and build a large martech company. There's still lots of factors that go into what makes companies scale and grow. But it's so easy for people to create all these like specialist applications. And I think one of the things about COVID, when that first hit, there was a lot of economic uncertainty, and people are like, okay, well, maybe this will be the trigger event that's going to collapse the martech industry. And I'll just come down to those 5 vendors. And what was interesting is the exact opposite happened. It was a tremendous amount of growth. And it was a tremendous amount of growth for 2 reasons, both on the supply and the demand side. The supply side is you had even more people who sort of leaned into like, wow, okay, yeah, the world has to be digital. What are, the opportunities to create some sort of new digital product? And so you saw a lot of startups, even a lot of startups that didn't have institutional capital funding them. Not to say that institutional capital doesn't play a role in certain martech companies, but, for particularly some of these smaller long tail applications, people can bring things to market without that. But the other side of it was the demand side, right? Hey, you can make the supply as large as you want, but if there isn't an actual demand side, the supply doesn't stick around. And the demand side, this flip that happened of COVID, people have been talking about digital transformation for, oh my goodness, like a decade. And anytime, I'm sure you'd like talk to a customer or client about their digital transformation plan. And it would be like this 10-year thing of like, yeah, somewhere by 2030, we will be digitally transformed. And COVID, again, like you'd never wish this on any of us. It was a terrible experience for, so many reasons. But one of the things that came out of it, it was a catalyst for companies of like, you are either going to be digital or you are not going to be engaged in the market at all. And so everyone like accelerated, all these digital transformation. And so that matching of the demand and the supply is, I think you saw a pull forward of multiple years of technological advancement in the martech stack. Now, the privacy side of it, is also happening here at the same time. And it's fascinating. This was one of the things I think a lot of people predicted. Oh, now that there's these new regulations in place, this is going to consolidate the martech industry. But that didn't happen either. What it did, though, was it created the incentives for having centralized data platforms to say, listen, actually, privacy isn't about having a wide variety of sources in which data can come in, and privacy isn't about having a wide set of destinations of where data can be applied. Privacy is about making sure that, okay, all of that data doesn't exist in silos, that it accumulates into some sort of centralized platform where you are able to provide a consistent set of governance and oversight to it. And so I think what we saw with the privacy thing is it actually accelerated in many ways this idea of like leveraging platforms like CDPs, to be able to take more advantage of this incredible diversity, of apps elsewhere in the martech stack. And I think we're now seeing, the same thing happen here with, third-party cookies going away, third-party data in general sort of, being more minimized. And people now, their eyes are opening up to not all the first-party data that they have in their martech stack, but they're coming to the recognition of like, wow, we actually have all these other systems in our company, everything from digital products to, customer service, and like, they're all generating data. And this is data that we could use to trigger these new kinds of marketing campaigns. And hey, we actually even have an ecosystem of certain partners. And this second party data, it's not third party data. It's a little bit closer to first party data, and are there certain partnerships where we might pull in some of this data? And so I don't know, everything that we thought would come along and would like be the constraints on the martech stack and the martech industry, in retrospect, you look back and like all of them did nothing but accelerate martech.
It's so true. Mike, I would love to hear what your experience was being a person trying to solve this as it was happening in those, few years.
I mean, it was a situation where you had to pull the market along in the early days to get them to try to understand this sort of new evangelical paradigm where it was, look, you need to understand your customer data. Your visit based analytics, those are I used to use the word cute, but those are cute, but they're not helping you engage your customers. And every company is going digital, and so every company is starting to compete for the same dollar, right? And we're getting to the point now where the barriers to purchase have come down. It used to be that I would go to Walmart and that would maybe be like 25 minutes away, and I wouldn't say, there's nothing for me to buy. Let me jump back in the car and drive 45 minutes to Best Buy and find it. Now I can switch context like that. Like, oh, Walmart.com doesn't have it? Awesome. Let me check Best Buy. Let me check Amazon. Let me check whatever else. And so the ability to switch context fast is something that came along at this, as well as like, even, going back to the day remember back in the day when you were going to go out and play with your friends and you had to come back and check in with your parents like during the day, or you had to come back to reload your cash so that you could go out and buy an ice cream or something like that. That's all done, right? I just check your location and see where my kid is, and I'm fine. And if they need more money, reload. It's so easy to do. So all of this created, it's been a snowball, and the snowball has continued to get bigger. And the problem is, people couldn't just say, you know what, we're going to pause this. We're going to put this strategy on pause for a while. We're just going to go back to the way it was. No, this was a burning the ships moment where you had to be able to do this. You had to be able to understand your customers, because if you didn't, your competitors were, and they were going to have an advantage over you. And so for me, I would say the market got pulled along, the box, the hypothetical box of thinking inside the box. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year. Like, now I can do this. Now I can do this. Now the cloud lets me do this. Now these tools let me do this. So it's been a rough ride, staying with this and still trying to have that philosophy of we want to help you use your data to put better experiences in front of your customers. I mean, that's a simplistic theme that we're going for, but it's been a hell of a ride. And I will say, we knew, Scott, you talk about third-party cookies. We knew they were dying. We'd walk into customers and they'd say, get rid of all these piggyback tags. And so we knew that model wasn't going to hold up. We had customers that say, listen, I don't know that people shop at Home Depot and drink Coke. I don't know if that means they want to buy my cars, but some algorithm out there says that they will. And so there were a lot of people that didn't trust it. But I will say, for all of the things that we wanted to do in the industry, I can honestly say that GDPR, man, did that catch me off guard. And it come on fast. But you know what? I think there are pockets of greatness in there. There's still some ambiguity in there between some of the regulations, and I think the industry is still learning what they need to do. But to your point, Scott, all of these things have made companies say, I have to keep going. I have to keep moving forward, and I have to do this with data integrity, with consent and privacy in mind, and I have to, going back to guys like Jeff Bezos, I have to pretend like my customer's sitting at the table because they're what matters.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting on the GDPR side is one of the challenges marketers had for years leading up to that was data quality, and it was expensive to put the infrastructure in place to deal with data quality. So most people were like, all right, we'll just make it up in volume. GDPR was challenging because it required marketers to put in place now all this infrastructure, for monitoring and managing their data. But the upside that came out of that is really almost a side effect of it was that same sort of infrastructure and architecture to support what you need to do for GDPR compliance actually gave you the mechanisms to like finally start to focus in on being able to systematically manage data quality. So there was a huge sort of like pull along upside that I think marketers got from that I agree, they didn't go into it expecting that, but hey, you know, it was a win in the end anyway.
You know, and even with, you know, I mean, the two personas at play here, you know, are really marketing and engineering, at least back then. Now data is you know, is another persona that's looking into the future of AI. But like you said, there was a lot of advancement within martech around this. But even from the engineering side of things, I remember when we would start to talk to our architects and we would hear about systems, we would say, that's great. How are you going to delete it? That's great. How are you going to delete it? Because now deleting data, you know, forget what you know about me. All of that now is something that you have to do. So it wasn't just marketing that I think benefited from this sort of data revolution. Engineering did a lot as well. And you see, we have so much open source and so much technology innovation that's come along as, you know, just in the last year have we seen so much technology innovation, but over the last decade, it's been so much innovation.
It's I love that you guys sort of took all the topics that are going on right now and brought them all into these answers, right? You talk about consolidation, and it's almost like a cycle. Your tools keep getting aggregated and disaggregated. I know all the analysts have written about that. You talk about just the benefit, the side benefit of GDPR to everything else. I feel that's happening again with AI. AI is forcing so many things on your data, and all that effort that you put into that data will come out in every channel, every marketing initiative, every campaign. You know, all those things are going on. It's pretty amazing. You know, I know, Scott, you talk about the fact that one of the most common things that people struggle with is new tools and new software. Well, what hasn't become new over the last few years is data, right? The data that you create and your customer data, that stays constant while all these tools change. So that's great. And then customer experience, the fact is how you understand your customer and how you connect with your customers through the data, right? And that's what's really, I think, in the last couple of years. So, okay, moving the conversation to the next chapter now, which is composability, data warehouses, walled gardens. That was almost like a post-COVID gift to the marketing industry, that all the clouds are here now and they suddenly all have a place in this conversation. They're offering you products, and then the reverse ETL vendors come along, and now it's a thing, right? Everybody feels they should build this on their own. They all have a experiment going where they're trying it out. I know, Scott, you write a lot about composability. So I would love to hear, in the CDP space and in the data layer space, what are your thoughts on composability and where do you think that's going?
Yeah, you know, I mean, composability is one of those words that it's become a bit of a buzzword, you know, but the truth is, like, composability is actually a very natural phenomenon. In fact, we use it all throughout, you know, we've been using it all throughout like marketing and software for ages. Like, I mean, I'll give you two extreme examples. So one example, for software engineers, pretty much for the past 50 years, everything they build is composable. No software engineer like builds everything from scratch. They're pulling in different libraries, they're calling different APIs, they're using frameworks. Why? Because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You want to like take a, you know, whatever you can that's like foundational, you know, pull it together the way you want, and then sort of it's that composition and what you build on top of it, you know, that gives you a unique solution in the market. Complete opposite extreme would be every marketer does composability all the time and they don't think about it. The example is like Excel or Google Sheets. You know, it's this idea of like, oh yeah, I want to pull data from here, here, here. I want to get into some place where I can manipulate it and model it and, you know, make a prediction or manage a project with it. You know, spreadsheets are small data composability, and it's just very natural. And I think what you recognize is, you know, across the entire spectrum of everything we're doing in marketing, we want that flexibility now. Like when we are creating a particular customer experience, we want to be able to like bring in any relevant data from any given source. We want to be able to call any relevant service, throughout our organization to deliver what that experience is. If we're putting together a campaign and we want to think about like, okay, what are the different data sources of who we're going to target? What's going to be the, dimensions we use for personalization? We want to say like, oh, well, we got this information here, that information there. Yeah, I want to pull this together to compose this audience, and it really doesn't have to be a super technical barrier. In fact, this is, again, the wonderful thing about, martech software that's actually making it easier and easier, for marketers to take their composed ideas, and be able to actually bring them to life without having to get deep down into the technical weeds that, was once required, to be able to make these things.
Yeah, almost every marketing tool category has gone through that cycle and ends up at the headless version of itself, right? CRM, CMS, or automation. I'm not surprised that CDPs are there too. And I know, Mike, that you believe composable CDP is a good thing, especially the way where data warehouses are going. I've heard you talk about that before. I would love to hear for our listeners.
Well, I think that I think that anything you can use to make companies more comfortable with the technology, that because now it used to be 10 years ago, you'd have these big debates like, do we build or do we buy? And that debate is over, right? It's build and buy. And then it's the question, what do we want to build? What do we want to be famous for as an engineering team working for a company? But what do we need to buy? Because there is so much software out there, and it doesn't need to be redone and reinvented. And so that's I think some of the new engineering challenge, which is how much of it do we buy and how much of it do we build? And then when you are talking about the buy front, then it's what do we trust and what do we want and what are the patterns that we understand? And we're, again, it goes down to comfort. Right? What am I comfortable with? I'm comfortable with this type of architecture because this is what I understand just based on my history, based on my past job experience, based on my education, whatever it is, right? You're going to go in and say, I'm comfortable with this. I'm not as comfortable with that. So those are the choices that I'm going to make. Hopefully for companies, their engineering tenure is high, so that when people come in and make decisions, they're actually sticking with them rather than coming in and saying, oh, we got to change everything, scrap it, start from scratch. And then in 2 years, by the way, I'm going to be leaving and somebody else will come in and inherit this and decide if they want to continue my crazy schemes or if they want to rebuild. And that's where companies have seen a big leg up by really actually looking at the buy strategy, because with the buy strategy, at least if you pick the right partners, you make it farther in the marathon, right? It might be a little, maybe there's a little challenge with observability in the sprint, but in the marathon, you have these foundations, you do things in the right way. You're investing in microservices and things like that. Those are the new patterns out there that you have to take on. I do talk about composability a lot, and when I think about the customer data architecture, going back to web browsers, right? We had web servers and web browsers, but we always had this thing called cache in our web browsers, right? That in the early days, we always had to clear because something went wrong, and that was always the culprit, right? Clear your cache. We had CDNs, right? We had origin nodes and we had end users, but then we had these edge nodes that were out there that had the content closer in from a geolocation perspective to the customer, so it would deliver it faster. And so as I'm looking at the CDP and I'm looking at the composability of the martech stack, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that moments that matter are really important. And when a customer is interested in starting a conversation with a brand, that iron is hot. And these days, I do believe that the companies that can strike while the iron's hot are the companies that are going to be the most effective and they're going to win. And so for us at Tealium, that's why we've embraced real time so much, because we feel that in the moment is so important. That moment is critical. When people ask me, like, where does a CDP fit? I tell them, like, look, you've got a customer data architecture, you got a customer data warehouse, and you've got a CDP, and these two should play very well together. I give them the analogy of the modern computer. It has a hard drive and it has RAM. And the hard drive is where you store all your stuff into perpetuity. That's your customer data warehouse, and your customer data platform sits with it and partners with it to give you that speed that you need, because retrieving data out of a customer data warehouse, it's not always as fast as you want it to be, and at scale it slows down even more. And so for me, when I look at CDPs, I look at them as purpose-built caches that exist to be right there with the customer in that moment, all the while fueling the CDW and working with the CDW. But all of these things that we're talking about, everything that's in the martech stack, the way that I handle my data, the way that I prepare my data for AI, the way that I engage with my customers from an experience perspective, it's all about getting an edge, right? It's all about getting an edge against my competitors, you could say, I don't need to beat my competitors. I just need to keep my customers happy. And if I can keep my customers happy, they'll stay my customers. And so that for me is the philosophy. And how do I stay relevant? We all see on a daily basis broken experiences. I got 2 left-handed guitars back here. I get marketed right-handed only guitars all the time. Miss. The idea with it is how do you keep your customers happy? And that's for me, that's the exciting part of the journey, because you can always do better.
By the way, I love the metaphor for the hard drive and the RAM. I mean, coming from the nerdy kid who actually built his own computers, I'm physically seeing these pieces and how they get assembled together. But yeah, I think that's a very insightful way of looking at it. It sometimes, this is the challenge with martech, is there's an abstract view of it. There's a sort of hypothetically, what do I have here? And there's a data layer, and there's a decision layer, and there's, a delivery layer. And that model is useful in thinking about certain dynamics of, how you're creating a strategy. But when it comes to the actual implementation, there are all these real world factors, that the context even, in one particular app is very different than the context in other apps. 100% of your data is not entirely federated. In fact, you don't want 100% of your data, entirely federated. It would be a huge expense and cost, and so you want these combinations, of very localized, contextual, specific data mapped with certain more universal global data, and how you get that matched and, in the right time and in the right way. These are a lot of things that, to actually make martech deliver those seamless experiences are crucial to get right. And so anyway, just kudos. I love that metaphor.
Cool.
I love what you just described, Scott. I've had 2 recent experiences working with contractors, doing a bathroom here and then in my parents' house, and completely different approaches by these 2 people doing the exact same thing. Right? They had to do tile, they had to do plumbing, they had to do electric, they had to do the appliance. I call it appliances, and they both went about it in a completely different order. They both did it in the different sequence, and the end result was very satisfactory in both cases. And it's making me realize just how different everybody's mindset is when they think about their data versus their tech versus their strategy and their execution. And it's so much of a combination of what I already have, what my legacy issues are, what I'm used to doing, what skills I have in house. And this is the part that I think gets missed. Everybody thinks you buy the right tool and you've solved the problem. And it's just such a small part of the solution. The tool is just one part of it, right? So Scott, now with where things are going with AI, and I know you talk a lot about no code and just the value that no code is going to bring with business users and tech users. What recommendations do you have for people looking at tools, looking at data, thinking about things? What could we say to them?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly AI is an incredible catalyst. We were talking earlier about, everything from like, GDPR and, what happened with the pandemic. And, there's been these series of moments that have catalyzed tremendous innovation in marketing and martech. AI is absolutely one of those. And again, it's kind of fascinating that, people talk a lot about like, well, what's your AI strategy? But in almost all of these cases, what it really comes down to is what's your data strategy? I mean, so many of the AI engines at this point, I mean, they've gone from being like, wow, there's this amazing novel, one of a kind thing over here to this is a largely commoditized industry of, both commercial and open source solutions. The LLM is highly unlikely to be like your differentiating factor. What matters is, the data that you're able to feed into these models. And so I think this is catalyzed business people, marketers getting much more serious about understanding, well, what is our data strategy? What's the range of data that we want to collect? How are we going to manage it? How are we making sure it's getting in the right place at the right time to be leveraged the way we want? So I am very excited about that. I think that helps pretty much everything in the martech stack get smarter. The other thing you mentioned, no code, is a nod to this. I've always been a fan of the fact that marketers are some of the most creative, imaginative people on the planet, and in this whole digital world, it's just been this challenge of, on one hand, you've got this incredible malleability that is digital. I mean, unlike physical atoms, like, bits, you can like manipulate the heck out of them. And marketers have all these creative ideas of things they'd like to rearrange the bits. But for a long time, to actually get the bits rearranged, you had to have like software developers and data engineers and all these folks be able to do it for you, which became this huge bottleneck. And just out of all the wonderful ideas that marketers had, there was this tiny little fraction, that could actually make it through that pipeline. And one of the things that always got me excited about some of these no-code tools is they wouldn't work for everything, but even for like a bunch of these, like what you would consider low-end use cases, Clay Christensen's disruptive innovation model. It's like these low-end use cases that it wasn't even worth having a software developer or a data engineer like spend expensive time on because they were just a small little thing. We first saw these no-code tools start to say like, okay, well, maybe for some of those small and simple things, boy, could we just let marketers self-serve, some of those ideas. And every year, the tools got a little bit better and they could handle a few more cases. And now that we're at this moment here with AI, particularly some of these generative AI interfaces that you can just interact with in natural language, and then it starts to translate that into, here, I can run the actual queries to, create that audience for you or give you this analysis. Stuff is still early, I want to keep everyone's expectations in check. But you see the pace at which it's developing and you realize, okay, yeah, over these next few years, you aren't going to have to know SQL or JavaScript or anything like that. If you're just a marketer who has like, I'm curious about this data of how this cohort compared to this other thing. Oh, and once I see that now, I'd like to send a campaign, and could we actually A/B test a campaign, and to just be able to like take that imagination, put it into words, and have the software actually do what you want it to do. I think it's going to unleash, quite frankly, the most exciting decade ahead of creative marketing in the digital sphere. So anyway, I'm super enthusiastic about where this is taking us.
Yeah, I wish you were more positive on AI. No, that totally, it's rare, but it's rare to have a technology where the hype is really hype, but the possibilities are also real. I feel like what AI is going to do for us is real. It's just that our expectations right now in this moment are crazy. Mike, I know you've been trying to build stuff and solve for AI and meeting all the customers you're meeting. What are you seeing in terms of what they're going to need, and what are you recommending to them?
The finish line is still the same. I want to engage with my customers. I want to put great experiences in front of them. I want to help them get what they want, and hopefully what they want is something that I'm offering. And so that's so that hasn't changed. Now the path to the finish line keeps changing like crazy, but I do think that we are. it's starting to consent is starting to be well defined and well understood. Engineering design patterns are more understood and more consistent now in this day and age. Teams are starting to work together. They are starting to de-silo. We're seeing centers of excellences that come out at these companies and work across all these different divisions. I'll go back to the beginning. One of the first slides that we put in front of the investment community was, it's not about the tags, because we know we started with tag management, but for us, tag management put us into the data flow, and tag management let us start with the foundation, right? The cement that we put down before you build the house. And for us, we have slides that say it's not about the tags, it's about the data. And so that's the idea. Like when you go, I have been on the road a lot. And when you talk to companies and say, what is your initiative for AI this year? We need to do something. Not entirely sure what we need to do, but we need to do something. And I think that in a lot of cases, I don't always agree with the way that companies are rolling things out. I see people that say, well, we just hired 187 data scientists, so we're just going to let them figure out. Like, you could have hired about 9 and just spent a little time working on your data, and life would be so much easier, because all those 187 people are spending 94% of their time cleaning data, 5% of their time sciencing the data, and then the other 1% is on TikTok. But the idea is, get your data in order, right? We're not going to, to your point, you brought construction into this, Sav. I'm building a house. I'm not going to start with the roof, right? I'm not going to start with the roof. I'm going to start with the foundation of data, and I'm going to build up around it. So everybody out there that feels like you're way behind in AI, you're not. You're not. The fact that you can spell AI puts you in the game. Okay. But the idea is it's, again, I'm even when I think about the 4 billion martech solutions that'll be, out there in 2025, still, it's all about the data. It's all about the data. And as we look at AI, again, Sav, you've heard me say this 100,000 times. People say finding a needle in a haystack is very hard. Not for us. If you have small, well-organized haystacks because you're paying attention to data quality, needles are actually surprisingly easy to find. And that's, again, that's hopefully what's going to take me the next 16 years working in this industry, because I love this stuff.
I love it. I want to see a super graphic from Scott with 4 billion logos on it. That would be epic, almost like the sky, right? That is so cool.
We'll take it out to the Vegas sphere and put it out there. That would be fun.
I think that's an idea for you, Scott, to promote your super graphic on the Vegas sphere. That would be wild.
All right. Well, I'll start accepting sponsorships now.
You got it. Put us in. Put us down for a couple $1,000
for one logo.
Yeah.
Okay. So last question for you guys, Scott. As you look ahead with everything you see and everything you interact with, what are you most excited about that's coming at you?
Yeah, I think, we were just chatting about it a bit, but I really do think the AI interfaces to marketing technology tools is going to help a lot. Gartner has made some hay over the past few years where, they've asked a series of large enterprise MarTech teams, like, how much of your MarTech stack are you utilizing? And it went from 50 or 60% down to 40, 50%. And then this past year, 33%, and lots of hand wringing over this. And when you think about it, I mean, it's not that the technology doesn't have all this amazing capability. It's the fact that, okay, we've had two challenges. One is as the technology gets more and more advanced in all the things it can do, like how do people actually even know what's possible and how to take advantage of that? And I would make the argument that one of the answers to that is companies generally need to invest more in marketing enablement. I mean, we all know about sales enablement, but you really need to invest in like teaching your marketing team how to leverage this technology. It doesn't just enter by osmosis, and yet there's relatively little investment in that in a lot of companies. And so you sort of see that correlation to, utilization rates. But there's another way to solve that, which is like, okay, even if the tool itself is incredibly sophisticated, if I can have a simple interface in which I am able to interact with that tool, that if I can describe what I want in natural language, and then the tool can like make that happen for me, wow, actually the tool could get like 10 times more sophisticated, could 1,000 times more sophisticated. And my experience in being able to utilize it becomes, just effortless across the board, And so again, we'll keep the hype in perspective. We've got a ways to go here, but directionally you see this sense that I think AI is actually going to let us get a utilization rate out of all this incredible martech innovation. That's going to be awesome because it's it's the innovation is one thing. It's actually putting it to productive use in your company is where the real ROI comes from. And I think we're on the cusp of a big wave forward there.
Oh, I love that answer. Okay, Mike, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are you most excited about? What's coming at us?
Well, first, Scott, I love that answer too, because you're absolutely right. There's so many marketers out there that like own a Ferrari, but don't ever take it out of the parking lot, right? I mean, it's just they're barely scratching the surface. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that these new AI tools will improve utilization. I think that's more. And I think the tools, again, I think the marketers have to come in and be able to use some natural language interface that simplifies things and makes it more second nature to them. But at the same time, I think the tools have to go out there and say, okay, you're doing this. Have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing this? That's what software needs to do. It needs to, it's not just, hey, here's a canvas, here's some paintbrushes, and here's a whole bunch of paint. Have fun. We need that Bob Ross there showing us to make those happy little trees and how to do it. And so I think the tools can do that. Okay, Sab, answering your question, I'm old school. I mean, I played in bands in high school where it was 5 guys up there all playing their individual instruments. There was before, electronic instruments. We actually physically played our instruments. So I'm looking forward to how the technology becomes just a part of the equation, and how the relationships between people become a big part of the equation. Because the reality is, it's about partnering. It's about coming and sharing ideas. People say to me, oh, if I have Tealium, I probably don't need to spend this much money on this type of tool. Which one should I get? And my answer is always the same. I don't care, because we'll make any of them work. But you should go with that tool where there's somebody on the other end of the line that you feel is vested in your success and is willing to partner with you. So I'm looking forward to the dream of truly starting to de-silo the business, getting engineers and marketers. I know you'll agree with me, Scott. They've needed couples therapy for a long time. Getting these people to start work together and realizing that it's not about my department. It's not about your department. It's about the customer. And we all need to team up to make that customer happy. And that's what's going to make businesses great in the next 50 years.
Oh man, that was awesome. I don't think I should wrap beyond that. I just want to say thank you to all our viewers, all our listeners. Scott, love talking to you. What a great session. Thank you for making time. Mike, always learn a lot. To our viewers and listeners, please send us any questions, any thoughts. All our contact information is in the webinar. And thank you for making time for us. Appreciate all of you. And till next time, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.